I'm actually delighted to be here because it's my neighborhood. You know, usually I'm on an airplane the day before, I'm in a hotel the night before, I get up. This morning I got out of my own bed, I drove my own car here, and so it's fabulous, and I'm very delighted to be here. Let me get my technology clicker here. What I'm going to talk about today is appreciative leadership. How many of you do have the book and have been working with it? Okay, I told Tracy she needed to do the presentation because I have a feeling she knows what's in the book more than I do. But what I want to talk about today is this notion of a positive revolution. Thomas Jefferson years ago said, every generation needs a new revolution. Well, we certainly have had our share of revolutions in our past decade, if you will. But what I want to put forth is that every organization needs a positive revolution. And I'm going to talk about that from three unique perspectives. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of appreciative inquiry. I'm going to talk about positive psychology and the strengths movement. So again, some morning exercise. How many people have done some experiments with appreciative inquiry? All right, a good handful of people. So for some of you, this is going to be a reminder and maybe a little spark. Hi, Maggie. How many of you are familiar with the strengths movement and have read the Gallup work or know your 5 signature strengths? Great. And positive psychology. How many here have read Barbara Fredrickson's new book, Love 2.0? All right, I'm going to talk about each of those 3 areas a bit and then draw from it into leadership. So let me start with appreciative inquiry. This is a story that some of you may have heard, may not. It doesn't come from your work. It comes from the world of business and customer service. But I find that it's a useful story to kind of make some of the important points about appreciative inquiry. So a number of years ago, BP decided to open a series of automobile repair shops in the United States. They were in the Midwest. And after a year, they decided to look across it was about 20 stations that they had opened, and they wanted to see how their customer service ratings were. So they did an analysis, and they found out, let me now see where my little button is, that they had about a 79% customer satisfaction rating. And that wasn't so good. 3/4 of the people are satisfied, or 2/3 of the people are satisfied, 1/3 are not. So what do? They did what we would call what I would call an old paradigm analysis. They went out and they gathered together dissatisfied customers, and they said to them, why are you dissatisfied? What's wrong with us? What could we do to improve? And what was interesting about that is it made things worse. They didn't just get this information, they did what good managers are supposed to do. They shared the information. So they posted all of the information about what dissatisfied customers on the walls in every one of their 20 locations. So employees are now coming in, and every morning they see a list of, here's what makes our customers unhappy. Here's what causes them to be frustrated. There wasn't anything about what you should do about it to fix it. And so very soon, the bottom dropped out, and they saw that satisfaction declined. That should be no surprise. But when employee satisfaction goes down, and all the research shows us that quality drops, it doesn't matter the area that we're working in. When people are unhappy, they don't care about the quality of their work, and it drops. And when quality drops, again, it doesn't take a lot of research, but the research clearly shows that when quality goes down, customer satisfaction goes down. Now, this is a true appreciative inquiry story. As it happened, there was a young graduate student who was looking for a place to do his PhD research using appreciative inquiry. And he happened to be neighbors with the president of this organization. And over Saturday, mowing their lawns, they got talking. And Chet said to the president of the company, have you ever done research into what satisfies your customers? And the president of the company said, no, why should we? They're satisfied. Now that again gives you a little of that old paradigm logic. If people are satisfied, leave them alone. If they're dissatisfied, pay attention to them. Now I know that some of us in the room live our life that way because I'm guilty of that too. My daughter calls and she's got a problem. I have so much time to listen. She calls and she's just got some good news. I may not have as much time. We all have this unintended habit of focusing on what's not working well. So the agreement was, let's try an experiment. Chet needed a place for his PhD research, so they said, let's get together people. Now, here's what's interesting about appreciative inquiry. They interviewed satisfied and dissatisfied customers. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because we all have those brief moments and experience of satisfaction, even in the midst of a very dissatisfying time. Or we've got some experience of great satisfaction and a few times where we're not satisfied. Appreciative inquiry does not say, oh, you know, the world is only satisfying and good. But what it says is by focusing on what works well, we can bring that to life. So they also did a bit of benchmarking. They went to other organizations, not just automobile repair, and they found out what makes great customer service. They shared all that information. Now people are coming into the room and posted on the walls are all these ideas for improvement. And they find that in one station, what are some of the things you'd think would be on those walls? What satisfies people when they go to get their car repaired? A good interaction with whoever's serving them. What else? The questions get answered directly, promptly. Car is done. The car is done and it works. It doesn't have to come back. Price. Now here are some of the surprising things. Do you know that the quality of coffee in the waiting room made a difference? Do you know that how clean the bathrooms are made a difference? Yes, okay, a room that's predominantly women, we get that. So, but here's what happens. Walk in and in one station they go, how clean the bathrooms are. We don't even have a bathroom. We send people across the street to McDonald's. Oh, there's something we could do to improve. Coffee. Yeah, I think our coffee is lousy. I'd like good coffee too. There's something we can improve. So when we hear stories and we see what works well, we can replicate it. We can make it our own. We can actually make it better and tailor to our needs. And so that ability to do what we call a root cause of success, really dig into why things are working well, gives us ideas for doing more of it and doing it even better. So within 8 months, customer satisfaction went up to 95%. A great story, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of what is appreciative inquiry. It's a philosophy. I like to say to people, again, old models of change are about trying to change people. And many of you know that. In your work, we say it's systemic. You know, how many people do I have to change before the system changes? Well, with appreciative inquiry, we say, believe in people and bring them together and let them change the organization. Let them change the way things are done. And so it's a big shift in philosophy. I was at a conference about 3 weeks ago, and we gave a case study. It was an education case study to a group of people. And 3 of the 4 groups said, yeah, we've got to get the young people involved. They should do interviews. We should hear what they say. One group said, you know, I don't know. The kids really need to be looked after. You know, are we sure that their opinions are going to really count? You know, and what would we say? Of course their opinions are going to count. Of course you've got to have them involved. You find a way to involve them that's appropriate to their abilities and their interests, just like everybody else. So my elevator definition of appreciative inquiry is the study of what gives life to people, teams, and organizations when they're at their best. Right? So becoming a student of how things work well when they're working well. It doesn't mean that we don't have lousy days. It doesn't mean that the world is imperfect, because it is. But the only way that I'm really going to learn is if I become a student of how people, how teams, how organizations really do bring out the best of people. With appreciative inquiry, we say that inquiry is the intervention, and that the questions we ask are fateful. They not only determine what we learn, but they create the world that we're living in. Let me give you an example about that. I want you to really think about the questions we ask. Imagine if I come into your organization and I say, you know, I'm from the university and we're very, very interested in stress in the workplace. And I know that you experience a lot of stress. Tell me about times of stress. Tell me about when you are just feeling kind of overwhelmed and there's so much stress going on. I'd love to hear stories about it. And what causes the stress? What happens as you hear me ask that question? You start to focus on the stress. You start to think about the stress in your work life. And by the way, when you think about that stress, how does it affect your physiology? Sometimes if I'm in a smaller group and I actually call on one person and I can get a kind of sweet, young, blonde person who then starts to get bright red in the face just because they're thinking about stress. Okay? The questions we ask influence what people think about. They influence how we are physically responding and feeling. But that I don't know, I don't want to say that's not the biggest thing, but it also, our questions influence what we call the inner dialogue of the organization. So let's imagine that Tracy's come in and I've interviewed Tracy. And then she goes out over coffee break and she runs into Stephanie and she says, Stephanie, were you interviewed yet? And Stephanie says, no, I'm looking forward to it. And Tracy says, oh my God, I got thinking about, remember the time when we were trying to do that and it didn't work and we got all these people involved and nobody was showing up on time and we didn't have enough budget. Remember that? You know, that interview made me even wonder, why am I even working here? Okay? So the conversation over the water cooler or over the coffee pot can be changed. Now, it's not just because I'm a researcher. It's what we do every day as managers and leaders. We walk in every day and we ask questions. So the key is, what are you asking questions about? Are your questions enlivening to people? Are they asking people to really think about what they've done well, how things are working well? Are they inviting people to go out and over a pot of coffee say, wow, have you thought about this lately? Imagine if we were doing an inquiry into joyful productivity. Now, I've been using this example for a number of years, and I keep saying there are no books written about joyful productivity, and I'm waiting for somebody to write one. But imagine, instead, if I say to you, look, I know that you are working long and hard, and you care about what you're doing. Some of what you're doing in this room is some of the most important work, I think, in the world. Okay? And I know it's hard, but there are moments of joyful productivity. I am sure that you have all had those moments when you're sitting there, you're working, you're in a meeting, and you get your knitting done. And that's really fun. Or something happens. I know, I couldn't help it. I've got a couple of you, I'm so intrigued. So something happens that makes it really fun. Think about that. How many of you have stories of something like that? Yeah, you could all tell those stories. And then you start thinking, well, how do we do more of that? And you go out in the hallway and you start chatting. You know, I've been thinking, Maybe we ought to bring some more young people into our meetings because they ask the craziest questions. Or maybe we ought to do this. And you get more innovative. So the questions we ask determine what we learn, but more significantly, they create the realities that we live into. And that's what's so important about appreciative inquiry. In a large scale, we follow a process called the 4D process. And I'm going to talk about this in the workshop later today. But what we do is we say, start with your topic. Do you study stress or do you study joyful productivity? What's the topic of your inquiry? And then go out and discover the best. Find out lots of people who are doing it well. Collect stories of joyful productivity. And then envision your organization full of it. Envision a year from now when you win an award for fun in the workplace or the best place to work. Right? Imagine that. So you start by discovering and learning, you envision something, and then you've got to design. And those of us who work systemically, that's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. Now we have to design our programs and our policies and our processes so that, what I like to say, joyful productivity becomes inevitable because it's designed into the way we do things. And then, of course, we've got to organize for action. So this we call the 4D process. I'll talk more about it this afternoon, but I just wanted to give you a quick picture of it. Here are some of the many kinds of organizations that have used appreciative inquiry, ranging from the United Religions Initiative. We founded a global interfaith organization in the year 2000. It did not exist. Now it exists in over 500 locations around the world. Appreciative inquiry is one of the kind of founding tools. We did a lot of work with Verizon, GTE before it became Verizon, Union Management. The U.S. Navy has used appreciative inquiry for leadership development, leadership at all levels. And so you can see one of my favorite clients, the Sisters of Good Shepherd, for their long-term planning. Many different kinds of organizations use appreciative inquiry. And over a couple of decades now doing appreciative inquiry, we have started to notice some unique things about the people who choose appreciative inquiry as their methodology. They're a different breed of leadership. You know, in some ways we like to say appreciative inquiry is a methodology for new paradigm leaders. And we noticed several things. One, that what we're now calling appreciative leaders are willing to really engage with people. The admirals in the Navy sat down at round tables and spent 2 days in dialogue with everyone else. In fact, they even came in without uniforms because they were concerned that if they wore their uniforms, everybody would be quiet. So we said, don't wear uniforms. Make the whole meeting in street clothes. The second thing is leaders who care about people. We've had some remarkable clients who've said, you know, at Hunter Douglas, we're in the window fashion business, but really what we're in the business of is helping people have a better life. And we just do it by making window fashions, window curtains, and selling them. The people that we care about are employees and their families. And they truly believe in the power of the positive. I did a lot of work with British Airways, and Dave Eric, who is the then Vice President of Customer Service in the North American area, he said, let me tell you a story. He said, when my daughter turned 16 and was about to learn to drive, my wife wanted to teach her to drive. She said, you know, it'll be a good mother-daughter, it'll be a bonding. And he said, sure, I'm happy for you to teach her to drive. Okay, some of you are already laughing. You understand where the story's going. So the mom and the daughter would go out driving, started every day after school, and they'd come back. And the daughter would say, oh, I'm never going to learn how to drive. All she does is criticize me. And the mother would say, she's never going to learn how to drive. In fact, I'm going to be killed before she learns how to drive. She's going to drive in the middle of the road. And this would go on and on. So finally, Dave Eric, as he tells the story, said to his wife, can I just take her out and, see what's going on? So he took his daughter driving, and sure enough, when she'd go to make a turn, she'd put her turning signal on after she turned. And that we could call a problem. But Dave, being very positive and affirmative, the next time they come to a turn, just when she should, he would say, sweetie, now is the time to put your turning signal on. Oh, okay, thanks, Dad. And then he noticed she's kind of driving a little in the middle of the road. And he would say, sweetie, you have a good 2 feet on the right side of your car. You could drive a little more to the right. Oh, thanks, Dad. Right. The difference between saying, don't put your turning signal on after you've already turned, or put your turning signal on now, that's another big difference. Being affirmative, being positive, giving people the positive image of how to conduct themselves properly. And then willing to learn and change in the process. So often we meet executives who want us to help them do it to the organization. I know that's not any of you in this room, but you've probably met those kind of people. Fix them. And of course, with appreciative inquiry, we say that all the stakeholders need to be in the room, so you've got to participate. And over again, we come upon leaders who say, I'm amazed how much I've changed. I didn't think I was going to change in the process. I thought other people needed to change. This has really helped me be a better leader. So we started noticing that, and we did some research, and that led us to our definition of appreciative leadership. The relational capacity. I can't do it alone. It's got to be, it takes two to tango. The relational capacity to mobilize creative potential and turn it into positive power. Now, creative potential, just what's there, what's possible. But turn it into positive power, and we chose that word because so many of us shy away from being powerful. Power means to get results. Look it up in the dictionary. It's not a bad word. It's actually a quite good word. The ability to get the results that you set out to achieve. Right? And it sets in motion ripples. And we know that. There's nothing that is sort of a direct thing. It's like that conversation about stress or joyful productivity. It just keeps rippling. But it sets in ripples of confidence, energy, enthusiasm, and performance that makes a positive difference in the world. So appreciative leadership is really about how it is we come together with one another, really sense the potential and optimize it, build it into some powerful results. 5 strategies, and that's where I'm going to focus, and I'm going to weave positive psychology and the strengths movement into that. One more story. Client in Canada, over on the western coast, the British Columbia side of Canada. There's my geography. Shared this story with me. She said, Diana, I was invited to go out and give a speech. And I was going into a community that was very divided. It was the First Nations people and then the other people. And she said, I was going out to talk about health care for the community and how they could really provide services in the community. I was met at the airport by an elder from the First Nations community. And as we were driving from the airport to my hotel, he starts pointing out things along the way. He says, this is where we have these meetings, this is this. And she says, I noticed that we're driving along a river, and he's not talking about the river. So I said to him, tell me about the river and how it connects you. because the white people lived on one side of the river and the First Nations people lived on the other side of the river. And he said, oh, no, you mean how the river divides us. It doesn't connect us, it divides us. And she said, no, I mean how the river connects you. I'm curious, how does the river connect you? He got very quiet. He didn't say anything else to her. She was absolutely certain she had really offended this important elder. She walks in the next morning to the venue where she was speaking, and he comes up to the stage and says, I wasn't the one that was scheduled to introduce you, but I've asked if I can introduce you. And she goes, oh dear, now what is he going to say? And he gets up and he introduces her, and he said, I would like to introduce one of the wisest women I've ever met. And he tells this story, and he said, she asked me how the river connects us. Ever since I was a little boy, I thought about that river as the dividing line and all the ways the river separated us. But in order for us to be successful today in providing health care for all of our children and all of our people, we are going to have to start thinking that the river connects us. And so that's what I'd like to challenge us all to do today, is to think about the connections that we have. And I want to thank our speaker. The power of one question. When you put your values into your question. So what makes a positively powerful question? It's absolutely value-laden. It's what you want more of. You need to become curious about what you want more of. And even if you know you're going against the dominant narrative of the community, that's where it gets really exciting. You know what the narrative is. You know what the story is. You know how they always talk about things. So what question can you ask that will help people think different? That will help them see new possibilities? Right? I want to give us an example. So what you want more of, one of the things that I imagine you want more of in your work is collaboration across sectors. I imagine that all of you are working in domains where there are many different stakeholders, and collaboration is absolutely essential. So here's an appreciative inquiry question. Recall an experience of successful collaboration across sectors. It may have been among policymakers and service providers, or parents and teachers, within your agency, one school, or the whole community. I want you to turn to one other person now and interview them using this question. Now, it is not a break, right? This is an opportunity to experiment with an appreciative question. You'll have 4 minutes each person. So find a partner. One of you ask this whole set of questions. What was the situation? Who was involved? How did they contribute? In essence, you're doing a root cause of success analysis of successful collaboration across sectors. After you ask the question and your partner tells their story, change roles and do it the other way around. Clear directions. 4 minutes each way. It's going to be really fast. And I'll keep time. I'll tell you when it's time to change roles. Have fun with it. Yeah, so that was just a little taste of an appreciative question that's focused on something you want more of. You may have a lot of problems with it, but you want more of it. So you go out and you do a root cause of success analysis. So I want to now move from inquiry into the notion of inclusion. I read a wonderful quote 2 days ago, and I wish I had remembered who said it online. Everything comes across your desk. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Made sense to me, right? So in our work, we talk about inviting all of the stakeholders and being willing as leaders to really sit down and learn. That one of my colleagues, Marge Siller, says, "Don't talk about me without me." And that is really at the heart of appreciative inquiry and appreciative leadership. I want to tell you a story about the Idaho State Department of Education. This is what we call an Appreciative Inquiry Summit. And every once in a while, opportunities like this come along, and we get to bring the whole system into the room. And that's really, what we're particularly good at doing. I got a phone call, and a young woman, or a young sounding voice, she did turn out to be a young woman, said, I'm in the Department of Education in Idaho, and we need to do an Appreciative Inquiry Summit. And I went, huh? Why do you need to do an Appreciative Inquiry Summit? Because you don't do appreciative inquiry just for the sake of doing it. It's usually something that is important that you want to accomplish. And she said, well, I work in Idaho, and we have one of the best schools in the country for students who are deaf and blind. And she said, a couple of years ago, one of our state congressmen made a comment, an off-the-cuff comment, and said, we ought to think about closing that school. We could probably save money and provide the services in another way. Now, that comment had unintended consequences. Like the whole community got nervous. Parents started looking to move their children. Teachers were saying, do I need to find another job? Is the school going to be closed? It was 2 years later, and they could not stop the rumor. There was nothing that they would say that would quiet the rumor. And so they thought, well, the only way they could imagine doing it was if they brought everybody into the same room. And I said, well, we can't just bring 250 people together and say, should we close the school, should we keep the school open? That's an important question, but we've got to have something more compelling to bring people together to make it worth their time. And so they chose the topic, Educational Excellence, Collaboration, and Action, a summit on educational services for the deaf and the blind in Idaho. So they decided that they would host an Appreciative Inquiry Summit. I agreed that I would design it and facilitate it with a couple of colleagues. And, the subtext was, should we close the school? But the question that we had to deal with was, who do you invite? Who are all the stakeholders? So who would you invite? Parents? Students? Administrators? Legislators, congresspeople, funders, students, teachers, graduates, advocacy groups. Oh yeah, there were pro and there were against. Pro and con. Everybody had to be in the room. There's the list. I think you've probably touched on all of them. People from other states who were facing the same issues. Here were some surprises to me. Of course, we needed sign interpreters. And I didn't realize that when one is doing sign interpretation, they can do it for about 20 minutes. So we work at tables of 8, and every table of 8 also had 2 interpreters. We had to have space for guide dogs. We had to plan breaks for people and for dogs. I'd never done that. Talk about logistics. And so we brought everyone together, and we did an appreciative inquiry process. And in the beginning, we had everyone talk about experiences with students who are deaf and blind, people who are deaf and blind, and educational services. And after the interview, which was not 4 minutes like you just did, but it was 45 minutes each person. So people sat with someone for a good hour and 15 minutes, I think. And they did an interview about how they came to be involved in this area of activity and how they learned at their best and when they've had experiences with people who are deaf and blind that made their life better. Not just any old experience, but an experience that enriched your life. And after the interviews, it was the end of the first morning, I said, does anybody, want to make a comment? And one woman stood up, she said, I'm actually in the state Congress, and I came here thinking that we should close the school. She said, I didn't know much about it. I came to learn, but my first thought was that we should close the school. But I've just had an interview with George. And George's wife went to the school. And George, as you all know, is one of our leading businessmen, and his business is da-da-da-da, and she's talking about George. And George told me that the reason he could marry his wife is because she graduated from the school. Not because she learned to read and write, but she learned life skills. She can keep a house, they have children. She can do all of those things because of the school. I have to say to everybody, we've got to keep the school open. And that was then how the meeting kind of got launched, and we went on to go through a process in which eventually, that's what a summit looks like. There were, oh, the other thing, by the way, just to make the facilitator a little nervous, it was a public meeting. Therefore, anybody who wanted to come could come. So we planned for about 220 people, 250 people, but we didn't know who would actually show up, and there were about 240 plus people. And in the course of the meeting, the groups organized to talk about the kinds of services, and then at one person, somebody said, I thought we were going to vote on this school. And I looked down as I would look at Tracy, who was my client, and I said, what do you think? And she looks at her colleague next to her, and they said, okay. So we kind of stopped everything in the moment. We said, all right, at your table groups, talk about it. Each table gets to vote whether you think the school should stay open or not. And of course, everybody voted unanimously for the school. But they all had other things, like we need more parent involvement, and we need this, and we need that. And so that led to a whole series of recommendations that went to the State Department of Education, went on for budgeting, and got approved by the state legislature. So in this case, we had everybody in the room. And they were able to make some decisions about the services that they wanted to continue providing and services that they wanted to begin doing new. And it was an extraordinary process. So I wanted to just share that one with you, because inclusion can be something small in your day-to-day work. One of the questions you ought to just be asking, who else needs to be here? Who else needs to be in this discussion? Who else needs to have a say in this matter? And make the distinction between some people you just want to get their input. They need to have a say. They need to be, and some people actually have to be in the decision. So it can be really helpful as a leader if you learn to make that distinction. Who are the people who need to have input? But they're going to honor that you make the decision. But then there are other people who need to be in that decision. Okay? The third of the strategies of appreciative leadership is illumination. I love that word. I was so excited when it sort of stumbled into my writing. And in fact, it was the first chapter of the book that I wrote. And it's really leadership by bringing out the best of others. We say that we're made and imagined in the eyes of each other. How many of you have seen My Fair Lady or read the play? And you know, Eliza Doolittle says to the professor, treat me like a flower girl and I'll behave like a flower girl. Treat me like a lady and I will behave like a lady. So appreciative leadership really says, can you see the best in other people? Do you see the seed of potential? Peter Drucker says that leadership is really about aligning strengths in a way that makes weaknesses irrelevant. Now again, most of our, and I apologize if any of you are human resource directors or managers or people, but most of our human resource practices would say, let's do an assessment of Diana. Let's find out what she's good at and what she's not good at, and then let's develop her in the areas that she's not good at. All right? It doesn't work. All right? The folks who are doing the strength work, the Gallup people, Marcus Buckingham, say that strengths are a near perfect performance. They feel easy. We get increase in our productivity, our excellence, our success, and we feel a sense of joy when we're working from our strengths. Okay. The other thing, and this is what I love, is that people who are excellent performers are seldom well-rounded. Yay! You know, we're good at some things and not others. And that what the research shows is that if you keep developing people in their strengths, there will be an overlap in other areas. Kids who like to read, you help them be better readers, and they get better in math. It's an interesting bit of research that they're doing with the strengths. Each person's strength is their room for growth. Now, this is the piece that's important. Only 20% of people report that they get to use their strengths on a daily basis. Whew, we have a lot of work to do. We need to learn to recognize strengths, and we need to let it be okay that people can work to their strengths and say, you know what, that's not my strength. I need to say no to that task or that project. And we've got to allow a certain kind of conversation in our workplace so that we all can work to our strengths. And we have to be strength spotters. So again, another practice. We're going to try another interview. You can have the same partner, or you can turn and get a new partner. This is a very different question. Your last question focused on the activity. What was the situation and what made it work? This time, you're going to focus on your partner. And you're going to say, tell me about a success, something you've done in the past few weeks or months that gave you satisfaction and pride. What did you do? What else did you do? Who was involved? How did you get them involved? What gave you the idea? So this time, all of your questions are going to focus on your partner, and you are going to be listening to hear your partner's strengths. Are you hearing about someone who's really brave and courageous? Or are you hearing about somebody who's very cautious and takes their time and plans things? Right? What are the strengths that you hear as you listen to this story? And then you will say, based upon your story, I sense that some of your strengths are. Okay? So, find a partner, an improbable partner, someone that you don't know, and ask the question. When you reflect back, I don't know where my little, 4 or 6. So a very different kind of question, but equally important and powerful when you really are wanting to focus more on how the person does what they do and what their strengths are. How many learned something new about yourself? Yeah, it feels good, doesn't it? Yeah, good. All right, so strength spotting. It actually is something that I learned from a colleague, Peter Lang, in London many, many years ago. I'd like to give credit to Peter because he's not doing well these days, and I think we just need to keep his ideas alive. So I want to now move into this question of inspiration. We've talked about inquiry, we've talked about inclusion, illumination, bringing out the best of other people, and then inspiration. And that notion of to inspire, to breathe life into, it's to awaken the creative spirit. And one of the things that we learn from positive psychology is that people flourish in the presence of positivity. And I want to share a little bit about positive psychology. The way it came about was kind of intriguing to me because it started with a question. Marty Seligman, who was then the president of the American Psychological Association, said, I wonder, what has the field of psychology been studying in the past 30 years? And so he got together a bunch of graduate students. They were able to scan all the research, and the finding was somewhat appalling. That in the past 30 years of psychological research, there were 45,000 studies of human depression, neurosis, psychosis, all of the things that are wrong with us as human beings. And there were only 300 studies on joy, hope, and happiness. Now, on one hand, we could say, okay, that's psychology. But let's be real about this. Psychology serves as the basis of our educational pedagogy. It serves as the basis of therapy, We go to therapy, pay a lot of money, so that somebody can help us not be broken, as opposed to have a model of what a healthy human means. And so Professor Seligman said, I'm going to dedicate my tenure as president of the American Psychological Association to the creation of positive psychology, and really restoring psychology back to its initial roots, which was about understanding the well-being and the spirit of the human being. And in the course of doing that, one of the people who got a very early, very significant grant is a woman who is also in North Carolina at the university in Chapel Hill now, Barbara Fredrickson. I highly recommend both of her books. Her first book is called Positivity. Her most recent book is called Love 2.0. And in her research, she began asking the question, what happens when people are in the presence of positive emotions? And in her first book, she kind of defines positive emotions and tells you about a lot of them. And she discovered several things, and she calls it her broaden and build theory. Now, we're familiar with this. From experience, we know if we're in a situation that is scary and critical, what happens? We tighten up. It's the fight or flight. If we feel safe, if we feel invited, if we feel appreciated, we get bigger and we get more creative. So what her research finds is that positivity broadens our attention and our thinking. It does open us up to consider more alternatives and creates a bigger thinking pattern. It undoes negative, lingering, emotional arousal. And the only way I can describe that is, you know how I'm like a perfectly functioning 64-year-old person, and I go to visit my mom, and within about 2 days, you know, that's lingering negative emotional arousal. I get to be about 14 years old again. And actually, that doesn't happen anymore with my mom. But, and what she says is, it's not that I need positivity in that case from my mom. I just need to be in a positive environment, and it builds my resiliency for any kind of situations. And so it builds our resiliency for change. So positivity matters. And then she went on to do another phase of research. And she said, let's take a look at some of the stuff that we want in the world and in the workplace. And what does it correlate to in terms of positive emotions? And so again, her research says, if we want innovation, we have to have joy. How about that? We've got to play, we've got to experiment, we have to have imagination. That innovation, you don't think yourself into innovation. You play yourself into it, or we play ourselves. That if we want achievement, you got to have optimism. You know, how many times do we hear, you can do it, come on, it's okay, keep going, you'll do it. Achievement, optimism, opportunity, confidence, and perseverance. If we want new knowledge, yeah, we have to be interested. So it's a really important body of research because, quite frankly, I think it shows and it substantiates some of the things that we've known intuitively for many, many years. But it's really quite stunning. Now, she and a number of people have done research in what's called a positivity ratio. So it's important that we're around positivity. How much positivity? Can you get too much positivity? Is there too little? And what the research in Barbara's lab, a group of people in Chile have been researching teams, and then the Gottmans in Washington doing research into marriages. They all seem to say that people thrive, we flourish, when we're getting about 5 positive to 1 negative. So it's not saying, don't say the hard stuff. Right? But it is saying that we need to be in an environment that is more positive than negative. Fredrickson's research says, you know, all the way up to kind of an 11 to 1. Now, anybody here in an environment that's more positive than 11 to 1? Now, I'm looking for it. So because people say, well, isn't this all Pollyanna-ish? Isn't it all about making nice? Well, think about, again, the driving lesson. What is positivity in that? It's giving somebody a clear direction on how to succeed. So positivity isn't just nice job. It's creating an environment where people are recognized for what they do, they know their strengths, and it's clear what they can do to perform well. And so there's a lot of ways to look at positivity. The Gutman's Research in Marriages, their book is called Why Marriages Fail and Why Marriages Succeed. And they bring people into their labs, and they find that the thing that makes a difference is the way people talk to each other and about each other. That when couples talk about their marriage 5 times more positively than not, they tend to have a long-term successful marriage. So, important research. Another story you may have heard, but it's one of my favorites, so I just want to share this with you. It's a tale of 2 wolves, and an elder Native American grandfather decided it was time to teach his young grandson about life. And he said to his grandson, inside each of us there are 2 wolves. And one of the wolves is a hungry wolf. That wolf is mean and greedy and nasty and sometimes hurts other people. And the other wolf is a happy wolf. And the wolf is kind and considerate of others and shares. And we all have this struggle in us. We all have these 2 wolves. And the little grandson looked at his grandfather and he said, "But which one wins?" And the grandfather said, "The one you feed." So I want to suggest a way for you to feed your own positivity. And I've been doing this experiment lately with a friend of mine who called one day, and she was just having a hard time. She called again, and she's having a hard time. And I thought, now this is a person I really love, and I'm getting real tired of hearing all the problems in her life. So I called her, and I said, I have this idea. I want to be appreciation buddies. And so once a week, we call each other just to say something positive. She'll call and she'll tell me something she did that she wants recognition for. I'll call her and tell her something I did that I want recognition for. And we'll give each other recognition. Or I'll be thinking about her and I'll just call her up and say, you were telling me that story about how your husband said he wanted to do this interesting sports thing, and you called his brother and told him the secret like a little bird. That was so cool. What a good wife. And I'll just call up and tell her that. So I want to encourage each of you to get yourself an appreciation buddy. And make these phone calls short and only one purpose. Once a week, you call your buddy and you tell them something good about them. Now, that's going to do a lot of things. It's going to build your vocabulary, your positive vocabulary, because we don't have a tendency to look for the good stuff, nor do we have much of a vocabulary. Okay? So that's going to help you. But then you're going to get it back. Now, what's the odd thing, my friend and I? We can't do it just once a week. It ends up happening 2 or 3 or 4 times a week. It's really become a new habit for us. So I want to encourage you to get an appreciation buddy, and then after 4 weeks, email me and tell me what's happening. I'm really curious. Okay? And all of these PowerPoint slides, by the way, are going to be they're already on the website. So you have them, and you've got my website, and you can get my thing. So let me talk about the final of the 5 I's, integrity. I always sort of think, wow, I should put this one first. Well, but I have it last. But it's in some ways the most important. And the one that is in many ways non-negotiable. We've defined it in an odd way. We defined integrity as making choices that are good for the whole. And you all work, you think about, holistic approaches. The whole child, the whole school, the whole community. So I'm a word person. I started to look up the word integrity. And there's this interesting play. Integrity is integral. It's wholeness, it's whole. But wholeness is about healing. And healing is about holy and sacred. And so when you sort of really settle into what leadership is about, it's a sacred trust. Leadership is a sacred trust. It's a kind of relationship, creating an environment in which people are growing and evolving toward wholeness. And you're growing and evolving toward wholeness. So it's really having a consciousness of, are we doing something? Is this helping people feel whole? I got a call, and it's an interesting one because this is recent, like a day ago. Got a call from a young woman who I've kind of mentored along the way. She was very excited a week ago about a potential new job. And so she called me and said, I need some coaching, get me ready for my job interviews. Great. She then sent me an email and she said, Diana, I sent you their strategic plan, and now I got an email saying I'm not supposed to have it. Please delete it. Okay, I hadn't read it, but that's not a problem for me to delete it. She calls me and she said, I went in for my interview. And I was told, I was met by Debbie, I'm going to try to camouflage the names, and I was told that I wasn't supposed to have the strategic plan, and so please don't talk about it. I go in to meet with the CEO, who would be my potential boss, and he's trying to find his copy of the plan so he can tell me about it, and he's looking really foolish because he can't find what he wants, and I already know what he's looking for. Now, we laugh about that. She said, but the interview did not go well. Yeah, I guess not. So I listened, and all I could hear was her describing them. And I don't think I could work there, and this is what they're doing, and I don't think they want what I... And all I could hear was, she's out of integrity. She's lost herself. Of course she did, because somebody's keeping secrets. It doesn't matter what it was, but she had prepared, she had read that plan, she had done her homework, she was ready to go in and talk about it, and then she was told, by the way, you weren't allowed to have it. Okay? The rug was pulled out from under her. It was nothing that she did. Unintended consequences take us down often. And that's why we've got to get over looking at people. Because everybody did what they thought was right, but it rendered her incompetent. It rendered the CEO incompetent. There was no way they could have a healthy, wholesome conversation. So she and I talked this over, and she said, wow, how did you see that? And I said, I guess I've just been at it longer than you. But as soon as something goes out of integrity, everything else goes out of integrity. It's that ripple effect. We create good ripples, but we also create other ripples. So Martin Luther King said, make a career of humanity, and you will make a greater person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in. There is one rule, and I was going to put this as Diana's rule, but that would be really awkward if you went around quoting it as Diana's rule. But this is the guiding principle for integrity and appreciative leadership. Take care of yourself so you can take care of other people. That is the most important thing. When you are in your center, when you are in your wholeness, then you can help other people grow toward wholeness. But if you're not there, no matter what it is that knocks you out of your center, then you can't help other people get there. So the most important thing is to take care of yourself. Give yourself time for what you need. Take the time if you need to learn, if you need to be quiet, whatever it is. That, to me, is the way that we can be powerful as leaders and recognize the potential in other people is when we're in touch with our own positive potential. So in closing, let me just summarize the 5 things I've talked about. First, ask positively powerful questions. Invite participation, inclusion, improbable people. Include the people that you might not normally include. Be a strength spotter. Listen for the next day here at the conference as you hear people talking. Think to yourself, oh, I can hear their strengths. Maybe tell somebody what you've heard. Maintain a 5-to-1 positivity ratio. You know, on my good days, I can do that, but then there's those other days, you know? So be reflective of yourself, and most important, attend to wholeness, your own and everyone else's. So we have a few minutes, and I could take a couple of questions, and then we're going to do a book signing. So thank you very, very much.